Those 7 words are going to cost you $900 million. Ethan Caldwell laughed when he heard the whisper, because men like him were not used to being warned by women carrying silver trays. The private dining room at Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouse glowed beneath warm chandeliers, its dark wood walls reflecting the quiet confidence of people who had spent decades learning how to make money move. Outside, Midtown traffic shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, a $900 million acquisition was moments away from becoming the biggest deal of Ethan Caldwell's career. At 42, Ethan was the white billionaire CEO of Caldwell Dynamics, a technology empire built on precision, speed, and control. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored. His watch cost more than most people earned in a year. Around the table, 6 executives waited for his approval before they touched the contracts in front of them. Ethan owned the room without ever raising his voice. Then Maya Brooks walked in. She was 27, black, composed, and nearly invisible in the way people often expected a waitress to be in a room like this. Her black uniform was neat, her shoes spotless, her dark hair pulled back simply. She carried water glasses from one table to another while billion-dollar conversations passed inches from her. No one asked her opinion. No one expected her to understand what they were discussing. That was exactly why she noticed what everyone else missed. Maya had learned to watch before she spoke. She noticed the pauses between executives, the nervous glance exchanged between 2 attorneys, the way one page of the acquisition agreement remained turned face down beneath a leather folder. Then she saw the number. She stopped for half a second. $900 million. Her eyes moved across the page again. One clause. One phrase, one detail that did not belong. Maya knew she should probably keep walking. That was what people in her position were expected to do. Serve the table. Clear the glasses. Stay invisible. But something inside her refused to let the mistake pass. She stepped toward Ethan. "Excuse me, sir. I think there's a problem with the agreement." The room went quiet. Ethan slowly looked up. His expression carried the faint amusement of a man who had just been interrupted by someone he considered irrelevant. "The agreement?" he repeated. Maya nodded. "Yes, sir." A few executives exchanged uncomfortable smiles. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "And what exactly do you know about agreements?" Maya said nothing. He looked at her uniform, then back at her face. "You're a waitress." The words landed softly, but the silence afterward was sharp. Maya's fingers tightened slightly around the tray. She did not argue. She did not apologize. She simply looked at the contract again. Ethan smiled as if the matter were finished. "Know your place, Maya." She turned to leave. Then she stopped. She walked back to his chair, leaned close enough that only he could hear, and whispered 7 words. Ethan's smile disappeared. He stared at her. Maya stepped away, picked up the empty glasses, and walked toward the service door as if nothing had happened. Behind her, nobody moved. Ethan looked down at the contract again. This time, he read the page himself. And for the first time that evening, the billionaire CEO looked afraid of what he might find. For several seconds, Ethan Caldwell did not move. The room remained exactly as it had been, yet something had changed. The quiet clink of silverware from the main dining room seemed suddenly distant. The low hum of conversation beyond the doors faded beneath the sound of Ethan turning one page of the agreement. His eyes moved slowly across the numbers. Then he read the same paragraph again. Maya was already halfway through the service corridor. She did not look back. She knew what she had seen, and more importantly, she knew what she had not been told. 20 minutes earlier, Ethan had been surrounded by people who treated the acquisition like a celebration. The deal would give Caldwell Dynamics control of a smaller artificial intelligence company with a valuable medical technology platform. The purchase price was $900 million. The investors had called it aggressive. Ethan had called it inevitable. He had spent 18 months negotiating the agreement. His attorneys had reviewed every page. His financial team had built models for every possible outcome. Nothing, in Ethan's mind, had been left to chance. But Maya had noticed something none of them had questioned. The room itself told a different story if you knew how to read it. One attorney kept checking his phone. Another had avoided looking directly at Ethan for nearly 10 minutes. The representative from the company being acquired had become unusually quiet whenever the ownership clause came up. Maya had noticed all of it while carrying sparkling water. She had learned that people revealed more when they believed nobody important was watching. And in rooms filled with powerful people, a waitress was often the person they forgot to hide things from. Ethan finally looked toward the service door. "Who is she?" he asked. One of the executives shrugged. "Maya. She works here." Ethan frowned. Just minutes earlier, that answer would have been enough. Now it bothered him. He looked back at the contract. The clause Maya had noticed was buried in a section concerning intellectual property rights after the acquisition. It was written in dense legal language, the kind most people would skim without thinking twice. Ethan had seen the page before. His lawyers had seen it. The other side had seen it. Yet Maya had stopped because one sentence did not match the numbers printed elsewhere in the agreement. Ethan reached for his phone. "Call Daniel." His chief legal officer answered almost immediately. Ethan said nothing at first. He simply read the sentence aloud. There was a pause on the other end. A long one. "Where did you get that?" Daniel finally asked. Ethan looked toward the service corridor again. Someone pointed it out. "Who?" Ethan did not answer. He was still thinking about Maya's face when she whispered those 7 words. There had been no arrogance in her expression, no satisfaction, no desire to embarrass him, just certainty. That unsettled him more than anything else. Because Ethan Caldwell had spent 20 years building a world where people listened when he spoke. Tonight, someone had spoken softly enough that only he heard her. And now the most expensive contract of his career was sitting open beneath his hand, waiting to reveal whether a waitress had seen something that an entire room of experts had missed. By the time Ethan finished the call with Daniel, the confidence in the room had changed. It was subtle at first. A chair shifted. A legal folder closed. One investor stopped smiling. Nobody said the deal was in trouble, but nobody was celebrating anymore either. Ethan looked down at the contract and felt an unfamiliar question settling over him. How had a waitress noticed something his own team had missed? The answer began years before Maya Brooks ever walked into that restaurant. Maya had never planned to spend her 20s carrying trays in Manhattan. She had once imagined a very different life. At 21, she had been studying accounting at a community college in New Jersey, working evenings at a grocery store, and spending her weekends helping her younger sister with homework. Numbers came naturally to her. Balance sheets made sense. Financial statements told stories if you knew where to look. While other students memorized formulas, Maya wanted to understand why the numbers moved. She could look at a column of figures and notice when something felt wrong before she could explain exactly why. Her professors noticed too. One of them encouraged her to apply for an internship with a financial services company in New York. Maya applied. She made it through the first interviews. Then she was rejected. The official explanation was simple. Another candidate had more experience. Maya accepted it and kept moving. She had always been good at that. Keep moving. Do not complain. Do not wait for someone to rescue you. Life had taught her that dignity was sometimes quiet. Years later, she still remembered one lesson from that professor. Never trust a number simply because everyone else does. Follow the number. Follow the assumption. Then follow the place where the two stop agreeing. That lesson stayed with her when circumstances forced her to leave school temporarily and take whatever work she could find. By 27, Maya had become a waitress at one of Manhattan's most expensive restaurants. She did not tell customers about her unfinished degree. She did not announce that she spent late nights studying financial reports on her small kitchen table. She simply showed up, worked long shifts, and paid her bills. Her co-workers knew her as dependable. The regular customers knew her as polite. Most executives barely noticed her. Maya preferred it that way. Being overlooked had taught her something valuable. People spoke differently when they believed you were not listening. They revealed assumptions when they thought nobody would question them. That evening, while serving Ethan Caldwell's table, she had heard a conversation about the acquisition. She had not been trying to listen. She was simply close enough to notice that the purchase price and the intellectual property schedule did not seem to belong together. At first, she thought she might be mistaken. Then she checked the page again. She remembered the numbers. She remembered the wording. She remembered the pause from the seller's attorney when the subject came up. That was when Maya made her decision. She would warn Ethan once. Only once. She had expected him to dismiss her. She had not expected him to humiliate her. And yet, when he told her to know her place, Maya had felt no anger. She had felt something colder and more useful. Certainty. Because the 7 words she whispered were not a threat. They were a warning. And if Ethan Caldwell had read the contract carefully enough, he was about to discover exactly why she had been so certain. The room had gone quiet, but Ethan Caldwell was no longer listening to the silence. He was listening to the numbers. Daniel remained on the phone while Ethan traced the disputed clause with his finger. "Read the next section," Daniel said. Ethan turned the page. His eyes narrowed. The language was ordinary enough to pass unnoticed. Ownership, licensing, future development rights. But Maya had not been focused on the wording alone. She had noticed the connection between that clause and another section nearly 40 pages later. Ethan flipped through the agreement. Page 68. Then page 112. Then back again. The same term appeared twice, but with 2 different definitions. Daniel was silent for several seconds. "That should not be there," he finally said. Ethan's jaw tightened. "What does it mean?" "It means we need to stop." Those 4 words changed the atmosphere instantly. Ethan looked across the table at the executives who had been preparing to celebrate. The acquisition was supposed to close that night. The signatures were ready. The champagne was already waiting in an ice bucket near the wall. Now nobody reached for it. Ethan asked Daniel to stay on the line while he called the seller's legal team. Before he could press the number, the restaurant manager approached him. "Mr. Caldwell, I am sorry to interrupt." Ethan looked up. "What?" The manager glanced toward the service corridor. "Maya is finishing her shift. She asked me to tell you she does not want any trouble. She said she only pointed out what she noticed." Ethan stared at him. She did not say anything else. The manager shook his head. Ethan leaned back. For years, he had believed confidence came from knowing more than everyone around him. Tonight, confidence was beginning to look different. It looked like admitting that someone else might have seen the truth first. He stood and walked toward the corridor. Maya was near the service station, arranging clean glasses on a rack. The restaurant around her had returned to its normal rhythm. Guests laughed softly. Servers moved between tables. A piano played somewhere beyond the bar. Nothing about the scene suggested that a $900 million transaction had just been placed on hold because of one sentence. Ethan stopped a few feet away. "Maya." She turned. "Yes, sir." He hesitated. The word waitress no longer came naturally to him. "How did you know?" Maya looked at him for a moment. "I did not know everything." "Then what did you know?" She set the glass down. "I knew the numbers did not agree." Ethan studied her expression. She was not trying to impress him. She was not asking for money. She was not even asking for an apology. That made him more curious. "Where did you learn to read contracts?" Maya gave a small, thoughtful smile. "I learned to read numbers first." Ethan almost smiled himself, but stopped. "And the 7 words?" Maya looked toward the dining room, then back at him. "I thought you needed to hear them before you signed." Ethan waited. She did not repeat them. Instead, she returned to her work. That was when Ethan understood something unsettling. The mystery was no longer whether Maya had been right. The mystery was how much she knew. And somewhere inside the agreement, there was still one detail neither Ethan nor Daniel had found. Daniel called back less than 3 minutes later. His voice was different this time. "Ethan, I found another reference." Ethan stood beside the service corridor, one hand resting against the edge of the doorway while the restaurant continued moving around him. "Where?" Daniel gave him the page number. Ethan returned to the private dining room and opened the agreement. The page was buried deep inside a section that most people would never read carefully. It described rights connected to future developments, licensing arrangements, and intellectual property created after the acquisition. Ethan read the first sentence, then the second, then he stopped. "Daniel," he said quietly, "who drafted this section?" "The seller's attorneys." "And who approved it?" A pause. "Both legal teams." Ethan looked around the room. The same people who had been congratulating him an hour earlier now avoided his eyes. Nobody wanted to be the person who admitted they had missed something. Ethan turned another page. There it was. a cross-reference to a separate schedule that had never been included in the final packet. His expression hardened. "Where is Schedule C?" Daniel went silent. "It should be attached." "It is not." Ethan looked toward the folder beside him. "Then we have a problem," Daniel agreed. The missing schedule was not a minor clerical issue. It contained the ownership terms for the technology that made the acquisition worth $900 million. Without it, the contract did not establish what Ethan thought it established. With it, the meaning could change completely. Ethan suddenly remembered Maya's face. She had not looked surprised when she warned him. She had looked certain. He walked back toward the service station. Maya was finishing the last few tasks of her shift. She placed a stack of folded napkins into a drawer and checked the clock. It was nearly 11:30 at night. "Maya," she turned again. "Yes." Ethan held the contract in his hand. "You knew about Schedule C." Maya was quiet. "I knew something was missing." "How?" She glanced at the pages. "Because the seller's attorney mentioned it earlier." Ethan frowned. "You heard that?" "I was standing nearby." "And you remembered?" Maya nodded. "People remember what matters to them." Ethan studied her carefully. "Why did you not tell anyone else?" Maya looked at him. "I tried to tell you." That answer landed harder than any insult could have. Ethan remembered the moment clearly. Her polite voice. His dismissive smile. His words. "Know your place." He looked down at the contract again. "What exactly did you whisper to me?" Maya did not answer immediately. She looked toward the dining room where the remaining guests were finishing dinner. Then she looked back at him. "You want me to tell you now?" Ethan nodded. Maya stepped closer, lowered her voice, and finally repeated the 7 words. "Do not sign until you find Schedule C." Ethan stared at her. 7 simple words. No threat. No dramatic claim. Just 7 words that had stopped a $900 million transaction. He looked back at Daniel's messages. Then at the contract. Then at Maya. For the first time that night, Ethan understood the real danger. The problem was not that Maya had discovered a mistake. The problem was that someone had expected nobody in the room to notice it. And now Ethan had to find out who. The clock above the private dining room moved past midnight, but nobody was thinking about going home. Ethan Caldwell stood at the end of the table while Daniel remained on speakerphone, reading through every reference to Schedule C. The room that had felt so confident an hour earlier now felt smaller. Every page carried a new question. Every number seemed to have another number hiding behind it. "We need the original schedule," Daniel said. "Not a summary. The actual document." Ethan looked at the seller's representatives across the table. "Where is it?" The lead attorney adjusted his glasses and checked his files. It was included in an earlier version. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Earlier version?" "Yes." "And why is it missing from the final agreement?" The attorney hesitated. "I would need to check with our transaction team." Ethan did not answer. He had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals, and he knew the difference between a genuine mistake and an answer designed to buy time. Daniel interrupted. "Ethan, there is more." Ethan picked up the phone. "Go ahead." "The missing schedule changes the ownership language." Ethan waited. "How much?" Daniel took a breath. "Potentially the entire value of the intellectual property package." The room became completely still. Ethan looked at the acquisition documents again. $900 million. That was the purchase price. But if the intellectual property rights were not transferred as Ethan had believed, the company he was buying could be worth dramatically less than the amount he had agreed to pay. The number suddenly felt enormous. Not because $900 million was difficult for Ethan to imagine. He had built companies worth billions. It felt enormous because he had almost signed it without seeing the full picture. Then Daniel said something that made Ethan stop. "There is one more thing. The schedule was referenced in an email sent 6 days ago." Ethan looked up. "To whom?" "Your office." The words hung in the air. Someone on Ethan's own team had received the missing document. Someone had seen it. Someone had decided it did not need to be attached. Ethan slowly placed the phone on the table. For the first time that evening, he was not thinking about the seller. He was thinking about trust. He remembered how quickly everyone had dismissed Maya. He remembered how easily he had done the same. A waitress had noticed a missing schedule. His legal team had missed it. His executives had missed it. His investors had missed it. And now he had to ask the question nobody in the room wanted to answer. Who had allowed the deal to reach the final hour without the document? Ethan walked toward the window. Manhattan stretched beneath him, thousands of lights moving through the night. He had always believed that the hardest part of building a company was making the right decision when everyone was watching. Tonight, he was learning something else. Sometimes the hardest decision was listening to the person nobody was watching. Behind him, Daniel said, "Ethan, we have located the email." Ethan turned. "What does it say?" Daniel paused. "It says the schedule was reviewed and considered non-essential." Ethan looked toward the service corridor where Maya had disappeared earlier. Non-essential. That was the word. The same kind of word people used when they decided a person was unimportant, a warning was unnecessary, or a question could be ignored. Ethan picked up the contract again. "Send me the email." Seconds later, his phone lit up. He read it once, then twice. His expression changed. The missing Schedule C had not been forgotten. It had been deliberately left out of the final packet because someone believed Ethan would sign before asking questions. And suddenly, Maya's 7 words meant something far bigger than a waitress saving a deal. She had not merely spotted a mistake. She had interrupted a decision that could have changed the future of Caldwell Dynamics. Daniel's voice was quiet when he spoke again. "Ethan, there is a name on the email." Ethan looked at the screen. The name belonged to one of the senior members of his own transaction team, someone who had been sitting at the table all evening. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. The realization was uncomfortable. This was no longer simply a missing document. It was a decision made by someone who believed Ethan would never look closely enough to notice. "Send me the full correspondence," Ethan said. Daniel did. Ethan read every message. The first email was routine. The second was shorter. The third contained a sentence that changed everything. Schedule C was considered non-essential and could be omitted from the final presentation materials. Ethan stared at those words. Non-essential. The document that defined the value of the technology had been labeled non-essential. He looked across the table at the executives who had spent the evening praising the deal. Nobody spoke. Ethan finally asked, "Who approved the final packet?" His chief financial officer looked at the legal team. The legal team looked at the transaction manager. No one wanted to answer first. Then Ethan's phone rang. It was the seller's chief executive officer. Ethan answered. "We have a problem," the man said. Ethan's expression remained calm. "I know. Your team is asking about Schedule C." "Yes." A pause followed. "That schedule was available during negotiations." Ethan looked at the screen again. "Then why was it not in the final agreement?" The seller's representative hesitated. "I assumed your legal team had it." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. There it was again. Assumptions. The entire $900 million transaction had been built on people assuming someone else had checked. He ended the call and turned to Daniel. "Stop the signing." Daniel answered immediately. "Already done." Ethan looked toward the restaurant entrance. The last guests were leaving. The lights in the main dining room had softened. Staff were cleaning tables. Maya was nowhere in sight. Ethan asked the manager where she had gone. "She finished her shift," he said. "She left about 10 minutes ago." Ethan looked at the clock. 12:22 in the morning. He had the strange feeling that the most important person in the entire transaction had just walked out of the building without asking for anything. He stepped into the hallway and saw a small folded note on the service station. His name was written on it. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a single sentence. "If you want the truth, read the schedule before you read the signatures." He read it twice. Then he understood what Maya had been trying to tell him all night. She was not interested in his money. She was not trying to embarrass him. She had seen a room full of powerful people moving too quickly toward a decision, and she had chosen to interrupt them because she knew what could happen if nobody did. Ethan returned to the private dining room. The contract was still open on the table. The champagne remained untouched. The investors waited. The attorneys waited. Everyone wanted an answer. Ethan looked at the document one more time. "We are not signing tonight," he said. Nobody argued. The $900 million deal was officially frozen. And while the room began to fill with questions, Ethan could not stop thinking about the woman who had carried water through that room unnoticed. She had seen the missing piece. She had warned him. She had walked away. Now the question was no longer whether Maya Brooks had saved his deal. The question was what else she had noticed that nobody else had. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the restaurant was almost empty. But inside Caldwell Dynamics, the night was only beginning. Ethan sat alone in the back of a waiting car, staring at the documents Daniel had sent to his tablet. Schedule C was finally in his hands. The more he read, the worse the situation became. The missing document did not simply clarify ownership. It revealed that several of the most valuable artificial intelligence patents would remain under the control of the company Ethan was purchasing. Caldwell Dynamics would have paid $900 million for a company while receiving far less of the intellectual property that had justified the price. Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes. $900 million. One sentence. One missing schedule. One waitress who had noticed what an entire team of experts had overlooked. But then Daniel sent another message. There is more. Ethan opened it immediately. The financial model used to justify the acquisition had been based on full ownership of those patents. Without Schedule C, the projected value dropped dramatically. The deal was not merely overpriced. It had been presented to Ethan using assumptions that were no longer true. He called Daniel. How much is the exposure? Daniel answered carefully. If you had signed tonight, the difference could have approached $900 million over the life of the agreement. Ethan looked through the window at the quiet Manhattan streets. The number finally made sense. The whispered warning had not magically cost him $900 million. It had prevented him from committing $900 million to a deal that did not match what he believed he was buying. Then Daniel added something unexpected. I spoke with the restaurant manager. Ethan looked up. About Maya? Yes. What did you learn? She has been working there for almost 2 years. Before that, she studied accounting and financial analysis. She also spent several months doing contract review work for a small consulting firm. Ethan was silent. Why did she leave? Daniel paused. Family circumstances. She needed stable income. Ethan looked at the message again. Suddenly, the black uniform, the tray, the quiet manner, the careful eyes all made sense. Maya had not been pretending to understand the contract. She had understood enough to recognize the problem. Ethan asked Daniel to find out whether she had any connection to the company being acquired. Daniel checked. None. Any connection to the seller's attorneys? None. Then why did she know? Daniel answered. Because she was paying attention. Ethan stared at those words. Paying attention. It sounded almost too simple. Yet that was what everyone else had failed to do. They had looked at the size of the deal. Maya had looked at the details. They had seen a $900 million opportunity. She had seen a missing document. They had listened to titles. She had listened to words. Ethan suddenly remembered the first moment she approached him. Her voice had been calm. Her posture had been respectful. She had not asked for recognition. She had simply said there was a problem, and he had dismissed her because of what she wore. The realization settled heavily in his mind. He had not judged her knowledge. He had judged her position. Ethan opened the restaurant manager's message again. There was an address attached. Maya's home address. He stared at it for several seconds before locking his phone. He could have sent an executive. He could have sent an attorney. Instead, he made a decision he had rarely made in his professional life. He would go himself. Because before he could save his company from a $900 million mistake, he needed to face the person who had warned him about it. And for the first time that night, Ethan Caldwell was no longer going to Maya Brooks as a billionaire CEO. He was going as a man who owed someone an apology. By 2 in the morning, Ethan Caldwell was standing outside a modest apartment building in Manhattan, still wearing the same charcoal suit from the restaurant. The city had grown quieter, but his mind had not. He looked at the address on his phone one more time, then walked toward the entrance. He had spent most of his life entering buildings where people knew his name before he arrived. Tonight was different. Nobody was waiting for him. Nobody was impressed by him. He was simply a man standing outside the home of a woman he had dismissed hours earlier. Maya Brooks answered the door after a short pause. She looked surprised to see him, but not frightened. She wore a simple sweater and held a mug of tea in one hand. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan said the words that had become difficult for him to say. I owe you an apology. Maya looked at him carefully. You do? Ethan nodded. He did not defend himself. He did not mention his company, his wealth, or the pressure of the deal. I judged you because you were a waitress, he said. I assumed your uniform told me everything I needed to know about you. Maya lowered her eyes for a moment. That happens more often than you think. Ethan accepted the answer without trying to soften it. You saved me from signing a $900 million mistake. Maya shook her head. I warned you. You saved yourself by finally reading the document. Ethan almost smiled. You are being generous. I am being accurate. The simplicity of her answer stayed with him. Ethan asked whether she had known how serious the problem was. Maya nodded. I knew enough to know you should stop. Why did you help me? She looked toward the window. Manhattan lights reflected across the glass. Because being treated unfairly does not give me a reason to become unfair. Ethan said nothing. There it was. The lesson he had not expected. She had every reason to walk away after he humiliated her. She could have let him sign. She could have watched the consequences unfold. Instead, she had protected the person who had refused to respect her. Ethan asked, What do you want? Maya looked back at him. Nothing. Nothing. I wanted you to read the agreement. Ethan stood quietly. Then he said, I want to offer you a position. Maya smiled gently. You are offering me a job because I caught your mistake? No. I am offering you a chance because you noticed what everyone else ignored. She considered his words. Then make sure the position exists for the right reason. Ethan nodded. He understood. She did not want charity. She wanted opportunity. The next morning, Caldwell Dynamics formally suspended the acquisition and began a full review of the transaction. The missing schedule was restored. The legal team investigated the approval process. Investors were informed. The company avoided committing $900 million to an agreement that did not provide what Ethan believed he was buying. But the most important change happened somewhere else. A week later, Ethan returned to the same restaurant. Maya was working near the entrance when he walked in. This time, he did not call for a waitress. He looked directly at her and said, Ms. Brooks. She turned. Ethan smiled. I came to thank you. Maya smiled back. She had not changed her voice. She had not changed her posture. She had not needed to. Ethan had changed the way he saw her. He had once believed power meant being the person everyone listened to. Now he understood something deeper. Real power was being willing to listen when the person speaking had no power at all. And sometimes, the most expensive lesson in a billionaire's life comes from the person he almost refused to hear.